It is depressing, it is sad, it is pathetic, but we have to recognize that the racism, bigotry, and intolerance that Trump inspired in 2016 is back, and it is back in a much bigger way than it was before. Take a look at this disturbing scene.
You're so bad, you're so cool. You're such a badass. Look at you.
You're gonna be fired.
Look at you. I'm gonna be fired.
Keep it up. You're gonna be fired. What are you doing, man?
Fire me.
Give me my food.
Fire me.
Just give me my food and cut the bull.
Cut the bull. What bull?
Why are you shouting? You got this, right? He's called You got this. You're gonna be fired tomorrow.
You called me.
You're back here hollering and you're back here.
You called me.
Giving your election book. Give me my food, bro. Please,
Election?
right
Give you your election. You were being voted.
You gotta call people slurs, dude. You like, what is that? How are you okay with this?
His worst supporters feel emboldened right now, and you saw that in that clip. What did the people working behind the counter do to warrant being called a racial slur? And he did it proudly. That's the thing that really makes my blood boil. In some cases, you'll see people run to racists' defense saying, well, they shouldn't be judged by their worst mistake, or maybe they were just having a bad day. No, this was calculated. He waited until he got his food to say it again. And you can tell by the way he did it, he was trying to inflict pain. He knew exactly what he was doing. This mentality and this hatred has been stoked into a wildfire. MAGA is not just a fringe outsider movement anymore. It is the Republican Party. And this rhetoric is endorsed at the highest levels of the party. We hear it in speeches, we hear it in talking points, we hear it from Republican leaders, and we see it every time a vulnerable group is singled out. But it doesn't just end with insults. Take a look at what some of Trump's enablers are actually calling for.
You're going to have cameras out there making sure that they capture the images of ICE coming along and taking these people away. And they deserve to be taken away. Sometimes you have to do tough stuff. But AOC is going to be there tying herself to migrants. It's going to be hysterical. But sometimes dad has to do the tough thing.
Hysterical. Can you imagine that? How traumatic that would be for kids, how unbearable that would be for parents. Families ripped apart, lives upended, and you are finding enjoyment in that. To be perfectly clear, this is not a difference of opinion on policy. This is a dehumanizing campaign under the guise of immigration policy. All this is organized malice, and they are making it perfectly clear. Compassion and decency have no place here. This is not politics. This is not policy. This is cruelty, plain and simple. As disturbing as this is only the beginning, because Trump has laid out even more far-reaching plans with even more devastating consequences.
As part of my plan to secure the border on day one of my new term in office, I will sign an executive order making clear to federal agencies that under the correct interpretation of the law, going forward, the future children of illegal aliens will not receive automatic U.S. citizenship. It's things like this that bring millions of people to our country.
Think about who he's talking about here. He is talking about American citizens who happen to have undocumented parents. He is talking about deporting American citizens. How does that fit with American values? How does that fit with the idea of America? But ultimately, how does that address the problem at the border? What does somebody living in, say, Topeka, Kansas, who's 14 years old and their parents are undocumented, how does deporting that child and that family secure our border? It doesn't. None of this is about securing the border. It is about dehumanizing immigrants. He ultimately wants to create an us versus them mentality and further divide this country. But the worst part is his cronies are already jumping on these plans. Take a look at one of his close advisors, Mike Davis, had to say.
We've talked about this, Ben. I have 5 lists ready to go, and they're growing. List number 1, we're going to fire. We're going to fire a lot of people in the executive branch and the deep state. Number 2, we're going to indict. We're going to indict Joe Biden and Hunter Biden and James Biden and every other scumball, sleazeball Biden, except for the 5-year-old granddaughter who they refused to acknowledge for 5 years until the political pressure got to Joe Biden. Number 3, we're going to deport. We're going to deport a lot of people, 10 million people and growing, anchor babies, their parents, their grandparents. We're going to put kids in cages. It's going to be glorious.
He called it glorious. That's the word he chose to describe putting people in cages and dividing families. Glorious. What kind of sick individual do you have to be to find any pleasure in the suffering of another person. This is not patriotism. This is barbarism. And the cruelty is the point. Thankfully, not everyone is staying silent. Here's what Governor Tim Walz had to say.
Look, we know what's coming down the pike. We know it because they told us. And we're going to have to be ready to defend the progress that we've made here in Minnesota. The other side spent a lot of time campaigning and talking about and promising that they would leave things up to the states. Well, I'm willing to take them at their word for that. But the moment they try and bring a hateful agenda in this state, I'm going to stand ready to stand up and fight for the way we do things here.
And this is what leadership should look like. Governor Tim Walz is speaking up and speaking out against this. He is standing up to this wave of cruelty. But where are the rest of our leaders? Why are other people capitulating to right-wing talking points and right-wing propaganda on issues like the border? You can talk about how you want to reform the system, and I think that's a conversation that anybody should be allowed to have. But when they are saying we're going to deport American citizens, saying, well, Republicans make some points on the border, is not standing up for what's right. All you're doing is caving on a hot button lightning rod issue and playing into the right's playbook. Silence here because it's uncomfortable or not helpful to your political prospects is not neutrality. You are ultimately complicit in that. And for the ones that are cheering it on, laughing about it, calling it glorious or hilarious, you're sending a clear message. That is who you are, and that is what we have become. And ultimately, I've been thinking a lot about what this says about our democratic system and our country overall. For this to have become so popular and so acceptable in our politics, it underscores the rot in the American political system. Generally, I just don't think that should be rewarded. What I've tried to lay out here is a pattern, showing that it's not just isolated incidents. It's certainly not Trump just misspeaking or people misinterpreting or misrepresenting what he said. It is a top-down systemic problem on the right, and unfortunately, a problem that is seeping into the Democratic Party. You have so-called moderates or blue dogs latching onto this messaging saying, yeah, we need to do something about the border. If Trump really cared about doing something about the border and immigration, that's what his policy would look like. That's what his talking points would be about. He wouldn't be talking about deporting children of undocumented people. And that's why I hope you understand that's not what he's doing, and that's not what the right is doing. They're trying to remake this country into a white nationalist one. And outside of a white Christian society, it's also one where compassion is unacceptable, where cruelty is rewarded. And if we let that happen, we are telling our children, our neighbors, our friends, future generations that the values America was built on no longer matter here. Telling them that what actually matters is power, control, and this twisted idea that to seize power at any cost is justifiable. And that is not an America I'm willing to accept. None of us should be.